Foreign Minister Besmirtnik tonight issued a joint statement telling Saddam Hussein it's not too late to end the war if he will pledge to withdraw from Kuwait and start removing his troops. The statement also pledges that once the war is over, the U.S. and USSR will work together, quote, to promote Arab-Israeli peace and regional stability in consultation with other parties in the region. Perhaps the closest the Bush administration has come to linking an end to the war with the beginnings of a wider settlement of the Palestinian problem and other regional issues.
I think this is an important statement because the two sides haven't made a joint statement on this subject for many years. So I think it's important that we have done it because it shows that we would like to see how we should work after the Persian Gulf conflict is over.
During the day, they don't come out.
Among the words made obsolete by the war in the Gulf, cover of darkness. A unit of U.S. Marine night fighters like these late last night uncovered in the darkness a column of Iraqi armored forces, called in Harrier jump jets and watched as the planes destroyed Iraqi tanks, armored personnel carriers, and supply vehicles. ABC News military analyst Tony Cordesman sees significant meaning in this brief encounter.
What it does mean is time and again we have armed reconnaissance over the battle area, over the area in Kuwait and just north of it. If a target moves, if anything presents itself, we can go in and kill it before it can shelter itself.
At least 90 Iraqi airplanes have sought shelter by flying to Iran. Relocations hailed by Pentagon briefer General Tom Kelly.
These aircraft have elected not to fight. They're getting out of town. They're running away. They're in Iran where they don't present a particular threat to us.
At the State Department, the question of the day was, will the planes stay in Iran, out of the war? Spokeswoman Margaret Tutwiler says there are plenty of assurances from Iran they will.
They have been very consistent in every statement they have made, starting at the top of their government with their president, President Rafsanjani.
And Tutwiler says there have also been private assurances. Tonight on World News Tonight, Pierre Salinger reported that these Iranian assurances amount to an abrogation of an earlier agreement between Iran and Iraq.
And one particular deal was made 3 days before the war broke out. Isaac Ibrahim, the deputy prime minister of Iraq, went to Iran and made a deal with the Iranians to provide safe havens for Iraqi aircraft.
Salinger says once Iran decided Iraq couldn't win the war, they decided to keep all the Iraqi planes. Meanwhile, Baghdad Radio reported today that Allied bombing had killed a coalition airman being used as a human shield. The Iraqis didn't name the airman or identify his home country, thereby adding cruel uncertainty to what an authority on international law says is a prosecutable war crime.
Well, under Article 23 of the Geneva Conventions, it's quite clear that prisoners of war may not be exposed to any area where they're in danger of the fire of combat. In fact, the provisions of that article say that you can't make human shields out of prisoners of war.
Feinerman says any nation signatory to the Geneva Conventions would have the responsibility to prosecute Saddam Hussein. I'm Dave Marish for Nightline in Washington.
When we come back, we'll discuss today's diplomatic communique with the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, with the former Assistant Secretary of State, who is now a New York Times columnist, Leslie Gelb, and ABC's White House correspondent, Brit Hume. And later in our broadcast, we'll look at the domestic side of the President's address with former Cabinet Secretary William Bennett and with House Majority Whip William Gray. We'll be back after this.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Ford.
Get away from it all in the new Explorer from Ford. If you're looking for 4 doors and more interior room than any vehicle in its class, if you want 4-liter power and push-button 4-wheel drive in the best-selling vehicle in its class, if the only thing you want to leave behind is the city, your Explorer is ready.
Have you driven a Ford lately?
How's your flight?
Uneventful.
Okay, can you send that down to finance now? No. Okay, hold on, I'm sending it.
Strange.
What?
More in line with Chicago. Where'd you find all these computer people, anyway?
What are you talking about?
I've got 24 PCs in my department, and my people hardly touch them.
You still don't get it, do you?
Get what?
You don't have the wrong people. You have the wrong computers.
And Nissan wins the score. Baja Internacional here in Ensenada.
Another first for Nissan at the HDRA fireworks.
Once again in Las Vegas, the winner is Nissan. And the competition eats dust.
If you want the dirt on 4x4, Nissan's SEV6 King Cab boasts the most powerful import brand V6 in its class.
Gold Coast 300 is history, and the winner is Nissan.
No wonder it's cleaning up.
Nissan, and it's not even close.
Nissan, it's more than a truck. It's an attitude.
H&R Block is prepared to take care of anyone's taxes.
We have to know the changes. We have to know the forms. That's our business.
America's tax team is ready for you right now.
We're prepared for all kinds of tax situations, from the simplest to the most complex.
No matter how complex your tax return is, H&R Block can handle your return.
It's satisfaction guaranteed.
No wonder more people choose H&R Block to get their tax returns done right.
We're America's tax team. Put us to work for you.
Thursday, Diane Sawyer in Egypt with President Hosni Mubarak.
Is there any way Saddam Hussein can emerge out of this alive?
Watch a primetime exclusive Thursday.
Joining us live from Jerusalem is the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. In New York, Leslie Gelb, who was the national security correspondent for the New York Times and is now a columnist for that paper. He also served as an Assistant Secretary of State during the Carter administration. And standing by at his post at the White House, ABC's Brit Hume. But I would like to go, first of all, to Deputy Minister Netanyahu. You are in a slightly awkward position in that your government has not yet commented on the U.S.-Soviet communique, but I'd be interested in hearing, first of all, your reaction to what seems to be a rather general suggestion that the United States and the Soviet Union will work together on trying to bring peace to the region, including the problems between Israel and the Palestinians and the Arab states. There is no talk, however, of an international conference. Nevertheless, there does seem to be a slight linkage between the end of the war and the beginning of that conference. Your general reaction to it?
Well, as you said, this just came up literally as we're speaking on the air, and I'm sure the government is going to give a detailed formal response later in the day. But I will say that the basic problem in the aftermath of this crisis is, of course, the problems of enduring conflicts here. And take the case of Iraq. It's been at war with us for the last 42 years, and like most of the Arab world, at war with us for no reason, not for what we do, but for the fact that we are, for the fact that we exist here. They rain missiles on us now for no provocation. So the problem that we have to address is how do we rescind the state of war that the Arab world has imposed on us? And of course, to the extent that the United States and other countries can impress on the Arabs to stop the state of war, that could help. But I'm not going to get into a more detailed response because we haven't had a chance to study it.
Well, what you've had years and years and years to consider, because for years the United States made every effort to keep the Soviet Union out of any kind of Middle East peace process, is the notion of the United States and the Soviet Union working together to bring about such a peace process. How does that strike you?
I think the entire world could work together if the pressure is placed on the right party, and the party is not Israel. It's not we who've been imposing this state of war. It's the Arab countries, and they've been, as I say, at war with us and refusing, with the exception of Egypt, to rescind that state of war. I think there's a larger problem here if we look at the post-war world. If the United States and the Soviet Union and Europe and others want to take an honest look at this situation, you have to ask, why do you have all these conflicts? Why do you have Arab against Arab, Muslim against Muslim, and of course, Muslim and Arab against Jew? If they can't make peace with themselves, it's very likely difficult for them to make peace with us. I think the reason is the absence of democracy. And we have to recognize that if Saddam Hussein is defeated or reversed, there could be other Saddams, he himself or others, who would arise here as long as there's no democracy. And in the absence of democracy, I think the only kind of peace that will hold in the post-Kuwait crisis Middle East is a peace that can be defended. Kuwait lacked the capacity to defend itself. It disappeared. Israel must have the capacity to defend itself and, I think, thereby defend the peace.
Now, there seemed to be a slight change in language in tonight's communique by the United States, and I'd like to simply point out to our audience that sometimes tiny changes in a word here and a word there can offer a diplomatic opportunity, which in this case, theoretically, could bring an end to the fighting. There is an offer by the United States and the Soviet Union suggesting that this war can come to an end if, and the language is, there is an unequivocal commitment on the part of Iraq to pull out of Kuwait. First of all, do you make anything of that language, and are you in any way alarmed by it?
Well, we've heard these formulations in communications between our governments, and so we're not surprised. But I must say that both Israel and the United States have said repeatedly that the departure of Iraq from Kuwait is not necessarily going to solve the entire problem. That is, we still have missiles raining down on our cities, threatening us, threatening our country, threatening our citizens. Those missiles, in the aftermath of the withdrawal from Kuwait, could be trained not only against us, they could be trained against Turkey, against Saudi Arabia, against any country. And so the president has often spoken, and we fully concur, about the need to neutralize Iraq's ballistic, chemical, and God forbid, nuclear capacity as part of any solution. I think that has to be an integral part of any settlement, however it's achieved, militarily or diplomatically.
And yet that is clearly not a part of the joint U.S.-Soviet communique tonight.
Oh, I wouldn't read that at all into it. I think that the statements of the President, of Secretary Baker, of others over time speak very forcefully for themselves.
All right, Mr. Netanyahu, I know because your government hasn't had a chance to consider it yet, you don't want to get engaged in any discussion with other panel members, so let me thank you now for joining us. And let me turn to our White House correspondent, Brit Hume. The President, in fact, was asked after the State of the Union address about this communique, sort of clear the dust for us a little bit, his reaction.
Well, when he came back from the Hill, Ted, reporters had been besieging his staff about it, and so the staff asked him about it, and he brushed off the question by simply saying it represented no change in policy and seemed apparently quite comfortable that there was no reason to think there was, and there was no big deal.
Les Gelb, does that often signify as much as it seems to, or does it sometimes signify less than it seems to when a government brushes off something like that?
Well, we don't know. When I look at the statement, I see a slight diplomatic change in language, but I really don't see a policy change. It seems to me that they altered some of the words in order to give Foreign Minister Bezmertnik something to take back to Moscow, something to show his leaders that the United States is attentive to Soviet concerns in Iraq. But as a policy matter, I think the statements about settling the Arab-Israeli conflict is more or less the same as the statement President Bush made at the UN. So I think the policy does remain the same, but you can't let Bezmertnik and Gorbachev have nothing as a result of their troubles and efforts on Iraq. This was giving them something.
The main point that I'm trying to get to here is there anything in this communique for Saddam Hussein? This, after all, is, I would say, at the moment, the key issue. Whether there is anything here that offers even a sliver of an opening that would give him something more than he's had before.
I think there is a sliver in the reformulation of the goal. The goal, as originally stated, was Iraq has to get out of Kuwait, plain and simple, then you talk. Now it says he's got to make an unequivocal commitment to withdraw and then take some concrete steps to back it up, and then one works out the modalities. So there is a slight difference in formulation, but my guess, Ted, is that the policy is the same, but here again, Bezmertnik can go back to Gorbachev, and Gorbachev can pick up the phone and try to get to Saddam Hussein and say, look, there's a different formulation. It's attentive to some of your concerns.
Brit Hume, to the degree that this represents an effort to give Gorbachev something, A, does that comport with the White House interpretation that they're giving you, and B, why does the president feel he has to give Gorbachev anything right now?
Well, the White House really has been silent on the question of whether it feels it has to give Gorbachev anything, but make no mistake about it, Ted, this president has set great store by his relationship with Mikhail Gorbachev and Gorbachev's participation in this whole diplomatic effort against Iraq, so that it certainly would not be surprising if the president was trying to find a way in language to give Gorbachev something he could work with diplomatically. There's one other point that ought to be made here, Ted, and that is that this whole idea that there should be no linkage to any peace conferences or peace efforts between Saddam Hussein's departure from Kuwait has been the idea that he should get no reward for his aggression.
I think that idea might be a little easier for the administration to deal with now that Saddam Hussein has had to eat about 2 weeks' worth of Allied smart bombs. You know, the president's trying to set an example for other dictators here. That's a tough example.
All right, Britt Hume and Les Gelb, thank you both very much. When we come back, we'll look at one of today's other Gulf developments, the flight of Iraqi warplanes to Iranian airfields, when we are joined by an expert on Iranian affairs.
Ford profiles in quality, customer satisfaction.
Today we realize that quality's got to be #1.
I said that back in '82, and today it's truer than ever.
The looks attracted me, but the performance sold me.
After 2 years, it still shines like new.
We love hearing things like that. The only thing better than a Sable
is 2 Sables. Our goal is to build the highest quality cars and trucks in the world.
At Ford Motor Company, quality is job one.
What can a Pitney Bowes mailing system do for your business? Watch this. Seen enough?
Now, Circuit City's cut prices to the bare bones. It's the Price Slasher sale, packed with big values on top-brand audio, video, appliances, and more. Like this Sony car stereo radio CD player. Super digital sound for just $347.97. And Sony's water-resistant sports Walkman, now a low $59. Hurry in for prices cut to the bare bones. It's the Price Slasher sale now at Circuit City.
Welcome to Circuit City, where service is state-of-the-art.
Final reductions. Save up to 70%. The C&R January clearance sale.
Hi, I'm Vicki Lawrence Schultz, and on or off the set, I'm a big believer in happy endings. That's why my family gives to the Salvation Army. Their adult rehabilitation centers give everything a fresh start. It's a new beginning for our donations and a happy ending for everyone. Give.
Donate your goods to the Salvation Army. No matter where you live in this region, go to the Source. For the first time ever, get 1991 Fords at fleet prices at the Source. Sunnyvale Ford. Choose from 300 1991 Ford cars and trucks.
At fleet prices and pay nothing till May. $49 delivers.
Make no payment.
Till May.
1991.
But you must go now. This sale ends Monday, February 18th. Don't be left in the dark.
Go to the Source.
Sunnyvale Ford. El Camino Real between Fair Oaks and Wolf.
If you wait, you will pay more.
The stories that touch your life, from the people who care. When news really matters, Hugh Downs, Barbara Walters, 2020 Friday.
Tomorrow on Good Morning America, join us for all the latest news on Operation Desert Storm. Also reaction to the President's State of the Union address on Good Morning America tomorrow.
Joining us now from Charlottesville, Virginia, is R.K. Ramazani, professor of government and foreign affairs at the University of Virginia, one of the country's most distinguished Iranian scholars. I understand you still have contacts in Iran, and I'd be most interested in knowing whether you have anything more than just theories as to why, first of all, the Iranians are permitting the Iraqis to land all those warplanes there.
Well, Ted, Iranians are acting in terms of their neutralist position, and that is that as a neutral country, they can let the planes come in without violation of international law. And as a country that has started to improve relations with Iraq, since Iraq has made a peace gesture in August, so that would not be incompatible with that kind of improving relationships. And at the same time, this really is not going to in any way be costly for Iran, in the sense that Iran would not necessarily damage its relationship with West European countries in the multinational force. Certainly Iran is interested in improving relations with the Gulf Arab states that are in the multinational force. Even the relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia may be improving in time.
Let me interject, sure, if I may. How reliable an assurance do you think it is on Iran's part when they say Those planes are there for the duration of the war, and so are the pilots.
Well, I think it is reliable, Ted, because there is nothing to be really gained by tilting toward Iraq at this time. There is nothing whatsoever to be gained because Iraqis have already offered not only an olive branch, the whole olive tree to Iran. They agreed with all the peace terms that Iran was interested in. So there's nothing really to be gained by tilting toward the Iraqis.
And yet they have made it quite clear that should, for any reason, Israel become in this war, that they would join in on the side of the Iraqis. Now, do those planes then represent a different kind of entity and reality should such a war take place?
I really cannot read their mind. I think I would find it very difficult to believe that Iranians would join a war in view of the economic conditions of the country and also the military situation. So it would be a suicidal war almost for Iran to enter. The highest priority for Iran has been for quite some time now growth economically and productivity economically. And they would want to be on the sideline, and if there are bonuses, they will collect the bonuses.
I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I just want to take advantage of one of our other guests on the program, Deputy Foreign Minister Netanyahu, who is still standing by live in Israel. Do you have any particular concerns about those planes? I mean, you've just heard once again an analysis that suggests those planes are out of the game for the war.
Well, we hope so, but we don't know exactly what prompted their flight to Iran rather. It could be a defection, it could be a deal between Iraq and Iran, it could be a forced deal on Saddam Hussein, that he knows that these people would deflect anyway, but we don't know. One thing we do know is that these planes and the planes of the Iraqi Air Force that remain still largely intact could deliver definitely chemical bombs against Israel. We don't know that he has them on missiles, but we know that he definitely can deliver them in planes. He's already done that in Iraq itself against the Kurds and in the Iran-Iraq war.
Let me just interject for one moment, because I took the precaution of talking to our military analyst, Tony Kodesman, before I came on the air. He tells me, yes, they could make it under two conditions. Either if they engaged, in effect, in a kamikaze flight from which they would not return, or if they could be refueled in midair on the way to Israel, but they do not, which would make them sitting ducks for American aircraft and coalition aircraft, but they do not have a range to come from Iran to bomb Israel and return safely.
Well, there's obviously a third possibility. I'm not getting into tactical analysis here, but just as they sped very rapidly into Iran without being shot down, they could speed very rapidly into Iraq without being shot down, get into their underground shelters, refuel, and organize within range. We see the whole problem of aircraft as a real threat to Israel. It's important to understand that the Iraqi arsenal, from our point of view, has not yet been neutralized. We know that the United States is doing a terrific job. It's hitting the underground shelters of some of these planes and apparently destroying them in shelters, which is very good. But we still know that the capacity in a desperate moment or in any mad moment of Saddam Hussein to launch these large numbers of planes in the direction of Israel is something that has to concern us in a real way. It could be a real and horrific escalation of this war, and something, of course, that would require a very strong response.
All right, Minister Netanyahu, Professor Ramazani, thank you very much indeed for joining us. When we come back, the state of the nation at war and at home.
Que contra una plataforma móvil de un misil Scud.
Because of the SAM threat. White indicates hot.
El color blanco indica calor.
The three director launchers or mobile Scuds are turning into the storage area to join.
Y usted se dará cuenta que las plataformas están movilizándose.
And you'll see these get darker as this film goes on.
Y el color de cada plataforma
laser-guided bombs on this target. There are a total
cambia.
of 11 vehicles
El piloto
in this area. And all of these are already loaded with Scud missiles.
Cada una de estas plataformas tiene misiles Scuds.
And now we
y ahora
will give you a slow motion so you can
les permitiremos ver esto en cámara lenta.
Notice the bombs come through.
Dense cuenta
Watch this one roll.
de que ahí el impacto.
The next thing you'll see is a secondary explosion.
Luego verá usted las explosiones secundarias.
AAA is firing from that area.
Un triple A
Flight lead
está...
now clears his number 2 man in to drop an area denial munition to take care of the remainder of the 4 vehicles that were on this side of the road.
Entonces se le concede a la otra aeronave aliada operar para lanzar y destruir.
Erector launchers, 4 Scud missiles on Scud servicing vehicles, and 3 more Scud servicing vehicles. The other possibility is that we knocked out as many as 7 mobile Erector launchers in just that one strike. I would also like to report to you that using similar tactics last night in western Iraq, we also attacked and destroyed 3 Scud TELs with F-15s, and I feel we preempted a missile attack on Israel last night. Now, I certainly can't say there will be no more Scud launches. You can never say that. But I have a high degree of confidence that we're getting better and better at our ability to find them, and I think this tape speaks for itself in our ability to find them and destroy them, and I assure you we're going to continue to pursue those launchers. One last announcement. Today, we went over 500,000 troops in the theater. Let me just finish up by giving you a very brief closing assessment. By every measure, our campaign plan is very much on schedule. Now, there's no way that I'm suggesting that the Iraqi army is close to capitulation and going to give up. I think their actions last night have proven that to all of us. But I'm quite confident that the direction we're heading in is going to lead to exactly the outcome that we all want to see. That completes the formal briefing, and General Gloss and I now would be very happy to answer any questions you might have. Richard.
General Schwarzkopf, the Iraqis claimed yesterday that a POW of unknown nationality was killed in one of the bombing raids on a place where he's being used as a human shield. What can you tell us about this human shield business, and how are you dealing with that when it comes to bombing targets in Iraq?
Tell you I'd really like to tell you how I'd like to deal with it, but I won't get into that. All I can say is that is a gross violation of the Geneva Convention. I think it's very important to state right now that the International Red Cross has inspected all of our POW camps, and I will let their report speak for itself. I would tell you anecdotally that yesterday we transferred quite a large number of Iraqi POWs over to the Saudis, and the Iraqis were being treated so well in our POW camps that many of them said they'd be perfectly delighted to stay right there with the treatment they're getting. It's a funny thing about American troops, but they take pretty good care of their enemy once they're captured. But as I said, the International Red Cross has inspected our POW camps. I challenge the Iraqis right now to do the same damn thing in their POW camps and look at how they're treating our people and the other coalition POWs. Thanks for the question. Skip?
General, you described heavy B-52 bombardment of troop positions in Kuwait. You described intercepting supply lines, troops that are giving you anecdotal evidence about 1 meal a day and body lice. And these same troops, it seems, made it 12 miles into Saudi territory last night. Was there any degree to which coalition troops might have been taken by surprise?
No, I don't think we were taken by surprise. As I said, there was nobody. Khafji had been abandoned. Okay, we had outposts in this area. The outposts reported exactly what we expected them to report. They made it into Ras al-Khafji, 12 miles, 6 miles. It's irrelevant how far it is because it was considered militarily. The reason why it was abandoned by the Saudis very early on is because, of course, it's in direct artillery range of the artillery right out here in Kuwait, and they didn't want to have bombardments going down on any troops that they had in this position. So in essence, the Iraqis that went into this area went unopposed. The Iraqis that went into these other areas were opposed and, in fact, returned back. I would tell you I don't think that battle is over by a long shot. I expect a lot more fighting will probably occur tonight. And I would tell you that, you know, obviously we've been talking, and we're ready for whatever comes in there tonight. But I don't think we were surprised. Yes, sir.
Sir, with the Marines engaged here, can you tell me how many American troops are in the forward positions there? I had the...
No, I'm not. I would never tell you how many American troops are in the forward.
I don't mean how many, but is there quite a bit? Is there quite a bit of American troops in the front lines?
There's enough American troops where we need them to do the job. That's about all I'd like to say on that. Yes.
Could you share with us your views on the threat
of Saddam Hussein to use chemical weapons against civilians, to escalate the war, to pull more surprises of that sort, to use biological weapons. Do you think those threats are credible or not? And what steps, if any, can you tell us that you're taking to meet them?
Well, as we've said all along, we don't discount anything on the part of Saddam Hussein. I think some of his other actions, some of the things he's done to date have demonstrated that he's willing to do anything. So I frankly, having seen the accuracy of the Scud missile, once again, I don't think that the Scud missile from a military standpoint, or even its ability to lay down a very, very dense, wide, long type gas attack, you know, because it takes many missiles with a certain degree of sophistication to do that. I don't think that that's going to happen. On the other hand, there is no telling whatsoever what he might try and do with a single warhead on top of a single missile, and therefore I would never discount that possibility.
General, why do you think these 89 planes have flown into Iran? Can you give us a reason why you think that's happened?
Well, you could really come up with three different scenarios, okay? Scenario number one is they are flying off to husband them for another day. That's one of them, okay? Husband their resource for another day. Scenario number two, you have that they are flying in there to launch an attack, against us at some future date, although the Iranians claim that that is not the case. And to date, I see no reason why we shouldn't believe the Iranians. Scenario number three, and we've had some reports that some of those people were defectors. So it could be any one of those three things or a combination of all of them. But I think it's a very good sign that they don't feel confident where they are. They got to run someplace else to hide, and I'm delighted with that outcome.
General?
Yes, Joe.
General Glosson, in the film of the attack on the Scud launchers, you said something about an area denial weapon, and we saw quite a large piece of landscape light up there. What kind of weapon is that?
That was a CBU-87, referred to as a cluster bomb munition, and it's for the purpose that it was used for there. I think right back there.
General, could you tell us how many Iraqi troops and tanks have so far come across the border in these engagements down here?
No, I really can't. I told you about a battalion, I think, in each case, and there's about 40 tanks per battalion, and again, we're not in the business. Obviously, we're shooting, not counting when they come across. So
just one follow-up question.
Sure.
Given this entire presentation tonight about the effectiveness of the coalition air forces, is there a chance that there won't need to be a ground war?
There's always a chance of that, but certainly, you know, as a military planner, you always plan for the worst case rather than the best, and I'm certainly not going to assume away the capabilities of the enemy at all, and the mere fact that they launched this spoiling attack or whatever it might be indicates that, you know, they certainly have a lot of fight left in them, so I'm not discounting that. Right here, yes, sir.
What were the weapons used against the hardened aircraft shelters? And a follow-up question on a different subject. Approximately what was the range of the MiG interception when the AIM-9 didn't work and he had to go to the radar-guided weapon?
He was, I'd rather not say the range when the AIM-9 did not fuse, for obvious reasons. The bomb that penetrated the hardened aircraft shelter was an I-2000 weapon that we use for that purpose, that's hardened for that situation.
Down here.
The bridges, the same type of weapon as we use against the hardened aircraft shelters.
General Schwarzkopf, there's been a late report from Reuters that the Iraqis have opened up another oil spigot at a place called Mina al-Bakr. Are you aware of this, and do you have any tentative plans to deal with it?
Mina al-Bakr has been leaking for several days now. That's an Iraqi oil terminal, in fact, and it's been attacked for several reasons in the past. To date, we've been watching that oil spill very carefully. Frankly, if it gets out of control, we'll try and do exactly what we did with the other one if we have to. I don't have any other reports other than that. I think I owe somebody over here.
General, I think to many civilian minds, the idea of the Iraqi ground forces going over to the offensive, as these probing attacks would appear to indicate, would seem very strange after such an intense aerial campaign. Could you enlighten those civilians?
Let me give you some. First of all, we haven't hit this area very hard. We haven't hit this area anywhere near as hard as we've hit the Republican Guards and some of the other areas. So this one hasn't been hit very hard. We may change our mind now, obviously. Secondly, there's an old saying, the best defense is a good offense, and sometimes, believe me, when people have been sitting in a hole being hit day after day after day by air, they decide that rather than sit around and take this anymore, why don't we get up and do something else about it? And it could be that. Thirdly, as I say, the Marines have been conducting very effective artillery raids in this area for about 3 nights in a row. It's entirely possible that these folks, based upon the severe damage that they had the night before, knew about all the artillery raids that have been about the same time. This may have been a preemptive attack to try and get after those forces that have been attacking them 3 nights beforehand.
Just a quick follow to that, if you don't mind. I seem to remember a week or possibly 2 weeks ago there being reports saying that these troops down there were virtually left without any soft-skinned vehicles to take them back. In fact, had virtually no means of transportation whatsoever.
Yeah, it wasn't these folks right here. It was these folks up here that came down, we think, okay? Yes, sir.
So you spoke of the explosion that was a 12 on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yes.
Can you give us any idea of what type of material that would have been, how long, to put it in layman's language, you know, what sort of equipment for how many soldiers over what period of time? You know, what sort of ammunition?
I wish I could. It's a huge ammunition dump. All of them in revetments. It's a buildup. When they first started building up in the theater, this was an area that they first started their major buildup from, and then they sent equipment down to other units, ammunition down to other units from that major supply depot. So it's all I can say is it was the major ammunition depot that supplied all of the forces in Kuwait, and with that level of damage done to it, coupled with the fact that most of the bridges are out now, and coupled with the fact that we're attacking the convoys that come down, that means that what they've got is what they've got. And they're going to, if they use that up, they're going to be hurting. Yes, sir, right here.
General, if you're unwilling to discuss Iraqi casualties amongst the Republican Guard, could you perhaps give us an estimate of the degree to which you've reduced the effectiveness of the fighting force?
No, because all it would be is a rough estimate, and I don't like dealing in rough estimates when you start talking about enemy casualties. I told you, I'm anti-body count. Body count means nothing, absolutely nothing. And all it is a wild guess that tends to mislead people as to what's going on. And that's not the way we do business, by wild guessing. So I just don't think it's, I personally don't like the idea of issuing body counts on a comparative basis. I just think it puts undue pressure on commanders to come up with numbers that are unreal. Yes, sir, back in the back.
There are reports in the oil industry that 50 to 90% of all of Iraq's petroleum, refined petroleum, adjacent to refineries and to power plants has been destroyed. The storage facilities, basically. Is that in the order of magnitude, and to deny the logistical...
Yeah, I told you we went after militarily significant targets. We didn't want to destroy their oil industry, but we certainly wanted to make sure they didn't have a lot of gasoline for their military vehicles. Back over here.
There are an awful lot of reporters in Saudi Arabia, particularly up in the Iran region.
Yeah, you got about 2 battalions worth, okay? I'm going to keep that in mind if we ever need you.
Well, the majority are being barred by the military from access to covering the war. The ostensible reason is mainly a lack of equipment, such as rucksacks and sleeping bags. Even if this is true, there's a large segment of non-polar reporters who are interested in covering things like aviation, supply, logistics, maintenance, things that would not require us to use this equipment, do not require us to go out and live with the ground troops. My question is, when will the military decide to stop managing the public's impression in league with favored media and allow the American people to get a full...
Is this a question or a statement, okay? I need to know.
Both. And allow the American people...
The answer to your question is I will refer you to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs who makes those policies. I'm the theater commander, and my job is to follow those policies when they're made. Yes, sir.
General, I think the chart showed nearly 1,500 sorties against Scud sites. That's more than your number of sorties against any other type of target. Do you consider that a proportionate military effort on the Allied side for something which you say is militarily insignificant?
I prefer to think that it's a required military effort given the circumstances that we're in right now. Back over here.
Is the Central Command in Baghdad still giving the orders to troops on the ground, or have you destroyed leadership command?
No, we haven't totally destroyed, but they certainly aren't giving the direct orders in the way they had to. There's a lot of circuitous routes that they have to go through. I would tell you even some corps commanders can't communicate directly with their division commanders and have to go through other division commanders to relay the signals. So they're being required to go around in circles rather than directly. Yes.
General, can you tell us what, if anything, you're doing to encourage Iraqi troops to surrender? And following on from that, can you tell us if you have had any news at all of the missing CBS News crew?
Yes. First of all, we've got an active psychological warfare program going. What we're basically telling them is that if they stay where they are and fight, they're probably going to be maimed or get killed, and if they come over here, they're going to be treated very, very well, and they'll live and get to go home, and that's basically the message we're sending them. The second question was...
You know what the CBS done?
No, we found their vehicle, okay, and then we got the very best trackers we had, and we had those trackers follow their tracks, and their tracks went into Kuwait, and of course that's as far as we could go. We're very concerned about it. I've alerted all my commanders. We're all constantly on the lookout for them, but that's about the best information I can give you at this time.
One follow-up. How are you getting the message to the Iraqi troops that they stay and they die, or they can surrender and be treated well?
I'd rather not answer that question. Thank you.
General, 3 days ago you gave us a briefing on the military effort to take out those manifolds at the Amadi oil fields. You talked about the airstrikes that went in. A Washington newspaper ran a story saying that the Navy SEALs were ready and willing to go in and do that job, but that you told them no. Is that true?
Normally in response to a question like that, I would say that that report contains some inaccuracies. However, reverting to my old style, I would describe that report as bovine scatology. Okay, better referred to by the troops as BS. I don't know who that guy's source is, but he ought to get a new source because his source is a liar.
General.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to see if I got this right. I get the impression that the Iraqi troops have seized Khafji. It's a little border town there, I know. We've all been up there. And that not American troops per se, but the Saudi National Guard troops, which I don't remember if they have that much armor, are trying to retake that city. Is that accurate?
I think I'd really rather leave a question like that to the Saudis because they can give you a lot more details on that. We work very closely together. The Saudis have reported to me that they're mounting an operation to go back into Khafji. I wouldn't really say the Iraqis have seized Khafji. You know, when you walk into an uninhabited place, it's really not much of a seizure.
They're occupying it?
Huh?
They're occupying Khafji?
The last I heard, there were some there, okay? But again, I have no confirmed evidence that they're still there. And let's wait and see what happens. We'll let the Saudis brief you on that because I think they can give you better information, yeah.
General, without revealing any military secrets, can you tell me what will be the factors or the criteria for you to decide if to begin a ground attack and when to begin a ground attack?
First of all, I do not make that decision. The President of the United States, in consultation with the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, will make that decision. The second answer is no. Okay? Yeah.
What is your reaction to the communique out of Washington the other day with Moscow and Washington talking about a possibility of a ceasefire if Iraq shows any indication whatsoever of pulling out of Kuwait? Do you think it's feasible from your perspective to
well,
conduct
I think that the correct answer to that from my part would be everything I know, we have no intention whatsoever of terminating this military campaign until we've accomplished the objectives that were announced at the outset. I'd refer any other comment to the White House on that. Yeah, over here.
General, you talked about the Kuwaiti theater of operations. If you go into Kuwait, expel the Iraqis, are you going to stop at the border or are you going to pursue them into Iraq?
Let's wait and see. Okay, this campaign has many different phases to it. There's certain determinations that happen each one, and I'm not going to telegraph any of our punches, but I will repeat once again what the President of the United States has said all along. That's our argument is not with the Iraqi people. Our intention is not to conquer Iraq in any way or reduce Iraq to a non-country. Never has been.
Sir, can I follow up? The UN resolution says to expel Iraq from Kuwait. You're just leaving the option open that you may pursue them into Iraq. Is that correct?
I'm not leaving any options open. I'm not leaving any options closed. I'm just saying that we have a military options beyond that. Back in the back, yes, sir.
Sir, you spoke of interdicting the main supply routes. Is it possible that the enemy could shift to secondary supply routes effectively, pickup trucks, jeeps, mule trains, etc.?
Yeah, there's always that possibility, but that's pretty rough to do. They have a very limited road net, and of course, with the Tigris and Euphrates being where it is, you got to go across the Tigris and Euphrates. I would expect to see pontoon bridges being put up. Pontoon bridges are pretty easy to find, and they're even easier to take out. But I would expect...
Follow-up, sir. Certainly in the Indochina War, the enemy did do exactly that, and their supplies continued to roll south. Granted, there's no triple canopy forest here, and we have better night sighting capability, but do you anticipate the possibility of an extended supply effort down to the more primitive level?
I would imagine that they will try, and I can assure you that we will also continue to do what we've been doing. big difference between here and Vietnam as far as the air operations and the ability to interdict supply lines. Yes, sir.
General, you mentioned the Marine casualties of 12 dead and 2 wounded. In your estimation, is that unusually high for an encounter of that size?
No, particularly when you consider, you know, the number of tanks that were involved, the number of tanks that were knocked out, and that sort of thing. 12 is not unusually high. Listen, any is unusually high as far as, I mean, any is intolerably high as far as I'm concerned, but unfortunately, that's going to happen. Yes.
Is there any news on the Arab forces who are stationed in Kafji as well, what casualties they've taken?
There were no Arab forces in Kafji.
There is a forward headquarters unit for Kuwaitis in that region.
Not in Al-Kafji. There was nobody in Al-Kafji, nobody, well, I won't say there was nobody there, but there was no Arab unit there that I know of. But why don't you ask the Saudis and the Arabs that. I think they can probably give you a much better answer than I can. Oh, in the back?
Given that you're disrupting the supply routes to Kuwait, and there are about 100,000 Kuwaitis still in Kuwait, and probably several 100,000 Palestinians and other nationals, what advice would you give them? Would you give to them now? What should they do?
To give to the Palestinian nationals who are in Kuwait?
All the people currently in Kuwait City, all the civilian population of Kuwait City.
I hope that they are continuing to resist in every way they possibly can. I would hope that their spirits are somewhat uplifted like this. I hope that they would continue to protect themselves as much as they can. I don't want them to do anything foolish that might get them hurt.
You don't want them to evacuate?
You know, I don't think there's any need for that at the present time. Believe me, if there is a need for that, we'll probably let them know ahead of time. Yes, sir.
You have mentioned that you have destroyed all of Iraqi nuclear reactor facilities. Do you have any information about the contamination?
About the what?
Contamination.
Yeah. Every target that we have attacked, be it nuclear, chemical, or biological, we have very carefully selected the destruction means, okay, after a lot of advice from a lot of very, very prominent scientists. So we've selected this destruction means in such a way that we absolutely, almost to a 99.9% assurance, have no contamination. I found one thing, none of the scientists will ever give you 100% assurance of anything. But they will tell you that there are certain ways that you can limit that contamination. And every one of those targets that we've attacked, we were very, very careful in the method of attack and the munitions we used to ensure that we didn't have any contamination. Yes, sir.
General, I'm curious about your handling of civilian targets, especially the point you made about power stations, I think, and hydro stations.
Yeah.
You mentioned you've left them alone because you don't want to reduce Iraq to, I think you described it as a non-country or to rubble. But can I ask you, in the bottom line, if it comes to the big push, is that open? Will those be hit?
That's a decision that lies with the hands of the President of the United States.
So it's not ruled out? So it isn't ruled out?
I have no knowledge whether it's in or out. As I say, that's a decision that rests solely with the President of the United States.
General, I wonder if you could speak generally from your experience.
Generals always speak generally.
What B-52 strikes of the type you've described can do to troops on the ground, even troops who are well dug in?
I don't want to get into too much detail, but I would tell you that the B-52 has a much higher degree of accuracy than it's given credit for. And therefore, regardless, and we have different types of munitions that we use also, and the combination of the accuracy of the munitions will have an effect on any kind of target, and we vary the targets, we vary the munitions based upon the type of target. I'd just like to leave it at that. Yes, sir, over here.
In 1986, during the Iran-Iraq War, it was generally believed that Saddam Hussein was personally ordering basically every major maneuver against Iran. I wonder if you understand that he is doing the same type of thing today, and given the effect that you've had on his command and control, if that's a factor.
I obviously can't say whether he's giving every single order or not. I would certainly say that his ability to give timely orders has been greatly reduced. In other words, if I'm on the battlefield and the situation changes and I'm waiting around for an order from the higher, I'm going to wait a lot longer now than I would have had to wait before.
That was one of the great criticisms.
Yeah, back here.
General, when the Iraqis occupied Kafji today, is there any preliminary indication that they destroyed the Arabian Oil Company facilities there, 15 million barrels storage? And,
I haven't heard any reports of that nature. Yeah.
Besides the fight to retake Kafji, whatever we're calling an occupation seizure, is the conflict continuing at the other entry locations you pointed out?
No. When I came over here, at least, all of those places were quiet. But as I say, I would not be the least bit surprised if we didn't have further action. Yeah, back here.
General, why did Iraqi troops and Iraqi tanks attack Rafji? Do you have any idea about what they wanted to do?
Oh, I think that there were, as I just mentioned earlier, it may have been to preempt another artillery raid. It may have been for all sorts of reasons. I've already heard that it's being touted as a major military victory on the battlefield. You know, moving into an unoccupied village 6 miles inside the friendly lines when there's nobody there, I don't consider that a major military victory. However, if they want to consider it one, that's fine. That's just one battle. It's not the war. Yeah.
What's your assessment of the fighting capability of the Republican Guard now?
I think it's too early to make an assessment on that. How about 2 more questions? Yeah, right.
One for General Glosson, if you don't mind. Refugees coming into Jordan have been telling tales of convoys of civilian vehicles being strafed, people running in the desert and being strafed, bombs dropping everywhere. Given that frightened people exaggerate, nonetheless, something must be happening. Can you tell us what you're hitting along that road and what happens if there are a lot of civilian vehicles in amongst what looked like a military target?
We're striking only military targets. Now, having said that, the Iraqi government insists on storing Scuds in culverts and other things along the highway. And as you saw on the tape, when we see those type of vehicles go into those facilities, we bomb them. We make every attempt to minimize any possibility of civilian casualty. And that's the best answer I can give you.
Yeah. General, along those same lines, some of the refugees and Red Cross workers have brought back fragments of bombs identified as cluster bombs, CBU. Are you using cluster bombs along that highway? And if so, how do you reconcile that with your efforts to minimize civilian casualties along this refugee route?
Well, you saw along one of the highways that we just showed you the film, and that was cluster bombs on those 4 vehicles or Scud missile launchers that were sitting along that highway. Yes, we used the cluster munition to cover a wider area when the military situation dictates that.
Let me step in here. We have never said there won't be any civilian casualties. What we have said is the difference between us and the Iraqis is we are not deliberately targeting civilians. And that's the difference. There are going to be casualties. Unfortunately, that's what happens when you have a war. But we are certainly not deliberately targeting civilians. We never have, and we have no intention to do it in the future. And our enemy certainly is, and I hope that's obvious to everybody in this room since you've been under Scud attack. Yes, sir, right over here.
I wanted to take you back to the planes in Iran. How would you rate the probability that they might have gone there for the purpose of launching an attack? And for example, what kind of supplies, ammunitions, that sort of thing that they might have there? And are you in a good, solid position to deal with such a probability?
I can't rate a probability, okay? But because I cannot rate a probability, yes, we are in a good, solid position to deal with such a probability. One more, right here, right here.
If Saddam Hussein were to have a briefing tonight in Baghdad and discuss 2 weeks of war, he would probably say that that is the coalition forces, have thrown the best at him that they could, and still he is able to launch an offensive. Now, as much as a distortion that may be, how much in your own thinking, when you're going through his mental process, is the political dimension of this war a factor? The fact that it is going on, that the Arab peoples are looking at it, and that you have a political constraint as well as other constraints to end the war.
Yeah. This is strictly Norm Schwarzkopf's opinion now, right? But it's opinion based upon discussions with a lot of friends throughout the Gulf area, some of whom happen to be very pro-Saddam Hussein. To date, Saddam Hussein has lied to them. They told them that Tel Aviv was a crematorium. We all know that's not true. To date, he has told them that he has shot down 170 American and coalition aircraft. Everybody knows that's not true. He has announced that he's going to do all sorts of other wonderful things. The other day, he said a prayer for the dead, okay, about saying because Riyadh was going to be wiped out that night. That did not happen, okay? He has lied consistently about us damaging religious places. A lot of people know that that is not true. So I think that one of the things that's happened out there is a lot of people who were supporters of Saddam Hussein, at least those who I'm not talking about the mob in the street, because the mob in the street isn't going to change their opinion. But I'm talking about people who intellectually, or at least reasonably, thought that he was supporting a cause, have found that he's not delivering on his promises, and that's probably doing him some harm. and I think that eventually they're going to find the same thing out about this particular attack. Okay, with regard to Saddam Hussein saying that he has met the best that the coalition has to offer, I would only say the best is yet to come. Thank you very much.
General Schwarzkopf and General Glosson, the most extensive briefing that we've had from General Schwarzkopf in the course of the war. His view of how it is going, 13 days and 19 hours in. We're just going to whip around and get some very quick impressions from people who have been listening to it. Let's go first to our military analyst, Tony Cordesman. Tony.
Peter, I think if we look at the map, we see there's been a fundamental change in the campaign. Up till now, we've had to concentrate most of our airstrikes outside this region. We've only been able to fly 300 to 600 sorties a day in that area, but we've already shut off much of their supplies. Now General Schwarzkopf has said we can change our airstrikes, concentrate on the 35 divisions in these forces, and systematically destroy the capability of the ground forces to attack. That's a major shift in the war. It represents the fact that we have won air supremacy.
How do you think the Allied forces are doing based on what you hear there today?
I think the Allied forces are doing very well. Again, if we look at the map, we're talking about a minor engagement of a regiment or so in the far border area. The Marines are there, but they certainly weren't forward. They're also offshore and can attack anywhere here. And the bulk of the Army forces are here, and they can come in through here or go around the flanks to Basra. So the engagement today does little to indicate it has any real impact on our major campaign.
Okay, let's go to eastern Saudi Arabia, where ABC's Sam Donaldson has been listening to the briefing. Sam.
Well, Peter, undoubtedly it was a minor military engagement, but I assume that Saddam Hussein hoped for a psychological impact, and he might have gotten one. We now have 12 body bags, the first Americans that we know of to be killed in action. We may have lost some pilots, but that's not known. And to the extent that this brings home the war to the American public, Saddam Hussein hopes that it will fuel the anti-war movement in the United States.
Okay, Sam Donaldson. In eastern Saudi Arabia, Barry Dunsmore has been at the briefing in Riyadh. Barry, your impressions?
Well, Peter, obviously this was quite an impressive presentation. I would just have the observation that I don't think that the land battle is just ready to begin yet. And I have a strong suspicion that when it finally does, it's not going to be a frontal assault on the city of Kuwait, that there's going to be some other way of going at it. That's an impression. I can't say much more than that, but I would be watching not for a frontal assault on Kuwait.
Okay, also listening to this briefing on our behalf has been Ben Shammer, the editor of the Armed Forces Journal International. What do you hear, Mr. Shammer?
Peter, I think those probing attacks across the Saudi border are the most encouraging sign we've seen yet. The more Saddam or his commanders move their tanks out of their bunkers and give us a chance to shoot at them with our M1s, with our TOW anti-tank weapons, with our Marine Corps Cobra attack helicopters, with our Apache attack helicopters and the A-10s, the fewer our troops will have to dig out of their bunkers in some really hard fighting. Okay. I hope we see a lot more of those.
Okay, and finally from Bob Zelnick at the Pentagon. Quickly, Bob.
Peter, checking with both military and Saudi sources this morning, I found recognition that this attack could be considered something of a political victory for Saddam Hussein, but there is a fierce determination not to give up the campaign as it has been planned, to wait until the U.S. and its allies are ready to launch a ground offensive at the time of their choosing, not Saddam Hussein's.
Okay, thank you all very much. The specialists who listen to this with specialist ears. Laymen may have some difficulty sorting it out. It certainly sounds as if the Allied forces have done a good deal of what General Schwarzkopf says they set out to do. Today, or in the last 24 hours, however, 12 Marines killed in battle with the Iraqis, and General Schwarzkopf saying there he doesn't want to count the enemy's casualties. He doesn't want to put his commanders under the pressure of coming up with body counts. But on an expanded edition of World News Tonight, an hour instead of our normal half hour, because of all this news today, we'll try to make sense of it all, politically and militarily. Until then, I'm Peter Jennings in New York.
This has been an ABC News.
Schwarzkopf, commander of Allied forces in the Gulf. In a status report on Operation Desert Storm, the general said bombing raids on Iraq have forced it to abandon centralized control of its air defense. Schwarzkopf showed videotapes of Allied jets blowing up bridges and bombing munitions depots, and he closed with his customary air of confidence.
With regard to Saddam Hussein saying that he has met the best that the coalition has to offer, I would only say the best is yet to come.
Well, into his second day.
The attack began yesterday when Iraqi armored battalions crossed into Saudi Arabia from 4 points along the Kuwaiti border. Coalition ground and air forces inflicted heavy losses on the Iraqis and drove them back everywhere but at Khafji on the Persian Gulf. Marine artillery pounded at Iraqi positions inside that city with round after round of 155mm shells, the men loading and reloading as fast as they could. South of Khafji, TOW missile batteries took up positions to block any Iraqi advance. But what began as a defensive move became a pitched battle. The Iraqis poured around 80 tanks into the fight. After an hour or so, it seemed the battle was over.
Looks like 2 battalions of Iraqis are wishing to surrender, and that they comprise approximately 80 tanks.
80 tanks?
80 tanks, yes, sir.
But the so-called surrender was phony. The Iraqis turned their gun turrets around to make it appear they were giving up, surrendering. They did not. The alert began in darkness, the Marines donning gas masks, surprised that Iraq would attack at all, knowing the strength of Saddam's forces is in fighting from heavily fortified positions, not in the open. Iraqi artillery units had been shelling Khafji since day 1 of the war, setting an oil storage tank afire and forcing the evacuation of its 35,000 residents. As recently as 5 days ago, Marine units had practiced urban sweep operations in the empty streets. Saudi pickets had patrolled the outskirts. When they were surprised by the Iraqi attack, they fell back, allowing the attackers to find cover in the center of town. Marine commanders say A-10 ground attack planes and other aircraft knocked out at least 40 enemy tanks and other armored vehicles. But if it turns out to be a victory, it came at a price. The loss of 2 Marine light armored vehicles like these, 12 Marines killed.
Now again, for clarification, the Iraqis are here in the little town of Khafji, which is about 6 miles from the Kuwaiti border. U.S. military officials say it appears as many as 150 of Saddam's soldiers are still there, in control of at least part of that deserted town. But as many as 4,000 troops are north of there and apparently still filtering down. One has to wonder, however, according to the experts, what Saddam is up to. The place has no military significance. The attack seems suicidal because the troops there are now surrounded. American commanders stress the fighting is a response to an Iraqi attack and not the long-awaited ground offensive to drive the invaders out of the country. It may be weeks before that happens, if it happens at all. One expert we talked to at 6 o'clock tonight, however, said Saddam still has the initiative in these cases, even though it seems a pointless initiative.
There is speculation that maybe the Iraqis are trying to bait the U.S. into an early ground war, but the U.S. is not taking that bait at this point. Well, today's sudden increase in coalition deaths brought calls from Capitol Hill for President Bush to do more to prepare Americans for the carnage that full-scale ground combat could bring. But the military concentrated today on raiding the war in the skies. Evan White has that story in the Washington News Center. Evan?
Indeed, Emerald. In fact, when the president was asked about the ground war currently going on the Saudi border you've been talking about, or the war in general, he referred all questions to the Pentagon. The Pentagon referred them to Saudi Arabia, where today's briefing came from, and from where, in essence, we got a report card on the air war against Iraq. It came from General Norman Schwarzkopf, the man who is in charge of Desert Storm on the front lines. And he made it plain that he thinks the coalition forces are getting straight A's and that we have gone beyond simple air superiority.
The simple fact of the matter is that now, every time an Iraqi airplane takes off the ground, it's running away. As a result, Chuck Horner, my CENTAP commander, has now claimed air supremacy.
To prove his point, the general then brought out dramatic gun camera video showing bridges being blown up at both ends, Scud mobile missile sites being obliterated, and hardened aircraft shelters flattened. He even included what reporters seem to see as comic relief, the truck driver who got away.
I'm now going to show you a picture of the luckiest man in Iraq on this particular day. Keep your eye on the crosshairs, right through the crosshairs. And now, in his rearview mirror...
As to the ground fighting on the Saudi border that's produced the first U.S. ground casualties, the general sees it as militarily insignificant.
I've already heard that it's being touted as a major military victory on the battlefield. Moving into an unoccupied village 6 miles inside the friendly lines when there's nobody there, I don't consider that a major military victory. However, if they want to consider it one, that's fine. That's just one battle. It's not the war.
Needless to say, the general was asked if he saw this as a preemptive strike to a full-blown ground war. He wouldn't get into that debate. He said, of course, he always plans his fighting men for what he called the worst-case scenario, a ground war, and it's always an option. But he said, in fact, that decision is going to come from the White House, not from him.
All right.
Emerald, Pete? Thanks.
Thanks, Evan. Then there's that oil spill to worry about. A Norwegian ship that sweeps up 14,000 tons of oil an hour is reportedly working on the massive spill. Meanwhile, the military is keeping a close watch on another slick coming from an Iraqi oil terminal. The first spill is expected to reach the world's biggest water desalination plant tomorrow. The oil-slurping ship is apparently working to protect that plant.
There is another big airlift going on at Travis Air Force Base tonight. Hundreds of reservists moving out, some bound for the Gulf, others for hospitals in Europe. Linda Yee is here now with the latest on that. Linda?
Well, Pete, Travis, once again, a very busy staging ground tonight for deployment. The jet behind me will be the second one leaving out of here tonight. It will be carrying a plane load of reservists who will be leaving their civilian jobs behind in support of Operation Desert Storm. Commander Brick Loomis said he's been saying goodbye to his family since he was called to duty several weeks ago. It has been especially hard for his children.
He was real sick in the hospital last week, and maybe that may have been part of it. So I think so, but she's dealing with it pretty well now.
I'm going to miss him.
You going to be good?
Going to try and take one day at a time.
Loomis will lead 150 members of his unit. Their destination is Saudi Arabia. Their job, guarding enemy prisoners of war. They will be away from the front line, but there is still danger.
We're worried about what Saddam has up his sleeve, because, you know, he could look at those soldiers that give up as a liability, and then he might come after them.
Nearly 350 medical reservists are also called to duty. Their assignment will take them to a British Air Force base about 100 miles north of London. They will care for the critically wounded soldiers at Knockton Hall, a World War II hospital kept up just in the event of war. Lieutenant Jim Lewis is a flight nurse who is leaving his wife and 5 children behind.
I'll be flying casualties, transporting casualties.
Your family worried, anxious about your assignment?
Yeah. Probably a little relieved because I am going to England and not closer to the front.
And how long are you going to be gone?
Nobody knows. It could be up to 2 years.
Some 500 reservists are shipping out throughout the night and morning, all of them not knowing when they'll see their families again. They are leaving behind very tearful families, but the reservists say they're also very proud to be serving. Pete?
All right, thank you, Linda. When we come back, a vigil for the Dublin girl missing now for exactly 2 weeks.
Good evening. I'm Richard Brown.
And I'm Ana Chavez. There are reports of more fighting in Kafji tonight, and members of Congress report that 14 more U.S. soldiers are missing in action tonight. Lawmakers said that in a Pentagon briefing, they were told that a modified C-130 transport was lost behind enemy lines, but they were not told whether the craft went down in Iraq or Kuwait. You'll remember last night we reported that 2 other soldiers are also missing from a transportation mission near Kafji. To find out more about the search for MIAs, we turn now to KGO's Greg Jarrett, who joins us by phone now from Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. Greg?
Anna, as far as the man and woman missing, the search was called off early on because of the proximity to the enemy. As for the aircraft, all search and rescue is being held top secret. By coincidence, my combat pool was on board that premier C-130 battlefield command and control aircraft just 1 week ago. The same plane reported down in Kuwait. There's a small trailer-type capsule that fits snugly into the fuselage of the plane. The rear gate that normally is used for kicking cargo and parachutes out of is opened, and the capsule is shoved in snugly. The gate is then closed and sealed. The capsule is equipped with a bank of color monitors on either side, a set of radios next to the monitor. A controller sits at each monitor with a variable map display on the screen. From the radio comes battlefield information. For example, if a ground unit is being overrun by the enemy, they call the C-130 for help. The plane then steers in air support. When I was on that plane, there were women on board. I don't know if any were on board when it went down, and as I say, search and rescue operations are top secret. We do know that the 4-propeller-driven plane could make a successful crash landing under the right conditions. It can fly very slowly. Anna, Richard?
Greg, earlier we had word about 5 or 6 divisions, about 60,000 Iraqi troops, columns marching toward the border, armored light infantry. Have you had any word on that recently?
Well, you know, we first started hearing word of the troops massing around